Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us at the Atlanta News First Plus desk for the political update this week. I'm Doug Reardon. We have some big headlines, local, state, and federal, so let's jump right into it. First, something local out of Fulton County having to do with that district attorney investigation into Donald Trump and perceived election meddling back in 2020. District Attorney Fonnie Willis here in Fulton County is standing her ground after an effort by the former president and his legal team to get her thrown off the case against him in Georgia. It's over his, again, alleged efforts to overturn the state's 2020 election results that gave Joe Biden Georgia and the White House. Willis was blunt. She said that she would stay on the case and continue to pursue potential charges of Trump through a grand jury report. The Trump legal team also requested that report actually be thrown out altogether. Willis said Trump's claims that she was biased have, quote, no standing. Back in March, Willis released part of that grand jury report showing at least one witness, possibly more, committed perjury in sworn statements. It also showed there was no evidence of any fraud in the 2020 election, as the former president has claimed. Now on to something out of Atlanta, a big honor for some big names here in the state and in the city. Last week, President Joe Biden and Vice President Kamala Harris released the names of 50 prominent Democratic Party officials that will compose their National Campaign Advisory Board for their 2024 White House bid, and among them, Atlanta Mayor Andre Dickens and Georgia Senator Raphael Warnock. They are the only names from Georgia on a list comprised mostly of lawmakers and officials from California and from the Midwest. Why? Well, the Biden-Harris 2024 reelection campaign says that the advisory board will help the campaign's efforts to build on and expand the winning coalition that sent President Biden to the White House in 2020. Certainly going to need some advice on how to do that in Georgia. It's going to play another crucial role for both parties in 2024, just as it did in 2020. Now, onto a statewide story. For anyone that is a fisher, an angler, a hunter, there are 1.2 million Georgians every year who usually get their fishing license. You're going to be putting it to use soon. You need to know about this. A new bill is going to codify access that citizens have to Georgia's navigable waterways, which include most rivers in our state. You probably fished on them before if you've been out there casting a line. The debate over this started when a company in South Georgia along the Flint River sued and won, claiming that they own their private land and also the waterways that touched it. Conservation groups kind of went into panic mode because the company was restricting fishing in their area. They feared that private property owners around the state might try to do the same. So on the last day of session, lawmakers quickly passed a bill that stated all of Georgia's riverways are open to fishers, hunters, and anglers under the decades-old public trust doctrine. So you are good there if you're a fisher. By law, you're free to use those public waterways to cast a line, even though that company from the original lawsuit is still claiming that they do have the rights to the water. So we'll keep an eye on that one for you now. A poll came out yesterday. We have been speculating, a lot of people have been speculating, whether or not Georgia Governor Brian Kemp might actually throw his hat into the ring to run for president. He still hasn't said yet. He hasn't denied it. He hasn't confirmed it. But we did get a poll yesterday that showed if he were to enter the race against some other likely and already declared GOP candidates, he would be polling at 7%. Landmark Communications, an Atlanta-based firm, ran this poll, and we talked to their president, Mark Roundtree, about this yesterday when it came out. Here's that. All right, well, I'm here with Mark Roundtree of Landmark Communications, who conducted this poll that we were referencing, one of the first to include Governor Brian Kemp among some of these more declared or very likely candidates. So, Mark, first thing we want to ask is, how did you go about doing this poll? Who were the actual people that you were contacting? Because you doubled your sample size from what is typical. And, you know, we're pretty sure that these numbers are people who are going to be casting votes in the primary.
Yes. Landmark Communications, my company, has been doing surveys of Georgia for nearly 30 years, and this is something that we regularly do. What we did in this particular case was contact tens of thousands of Republican primary voters, previous Republican primary voters who have voted in previous Republican primaries. There are about 1.5 million people in Georgia that have voted in a Republican political primary. So we contacted approximately 45,000 of them and asked them to participate in a survey. We received 800 people who participated.
Yeah, and so of those 800, we know that Governor Kemp polled at 7% when thrown into the mix with candidates who have declared or who are very likely to do so, like former President Donald Trump, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, former Vice President Mike Pence. What is the governor to make of that number, and what are undecided voters to make of that 7% as well?
Well, to be clear, Governor Kemp obviously has neither announced for governor nor has he even stepped to the line. We went ahead and included him in a survey of Republican candidates in the state of Georgia simply because his name does get discussed as a potential candidate, especially if the political winds would go his way, and particularly if the political winds would go in the way of someone other than potentially former President Trump being the nominee. So at the moment, he's not a declared candidate. Now, with that being said, we put his name into the mix to see how he would fare. We have concluded that among Republican primary voters today, former President Trump would carry approximately 40% of the vote. Governor DeSantis of Florida would carry 32%, and Governor Kemp, Georgia, of course, would be at 7%. Nikki Haley, the former governor of South Carolina, would be at 6%. Now, that doesn't mean that that's how the election would turn out. It just means that if the election were held today with no other information in people's minds, that's how they would vote.
Right. And, we see, obviously, like take someone like Ron DeSantis, who hasn't declared yet, but yet is polling so high. Why isn't that the case with Governor Kemp? Again, he has not declared, but he's not polling quite as high as some of these other candidates.
Probably 90 or more percent of news stories that have to do with candidates running for president mention and have mentioned for a year from current governor Ron DeSantis. So he's pretty much been considered the primary alternative to the former president. He has raised upwards of $200 million to help a potential campaign as well. So he's aggressively raising money to run for president and is raising a lot of money to do that. So he's just regularly mentioned as a candidate. And of course, Governor Kemp is not a candidate at this point. And so it's not surprising that people they may like Governor Kemp, but it's not translating into votes in the presidential race yet for him.
Right. They simply just don't see him, as you mentioned, in that way. Who is polling for Kemp? Because you guys did some demographic breakdown, but did they tell us anything about who is liking Kemp possibly for a run?
Well, he was getting the support of 7% of Georgians to run for this. We did notice that but we break it out by age, and just to see how different age groups would look like. And the 18 to 39 age group actually was a little more supportive. Those are younger voters. They generally have been in a group that maybe the former president hasn't performed as well with, and they were giving Governor Kemp 10% of their vote. So it was a slight increase.
Right. And then finally, we know, as is the case in a lot of other states, that former President Trump and Governor DeSantis are atop this poll that you guys conducted. But that being said, DeSantis did do quite well in Georgia compared to other states. Talk about that. Do you have any guesses as to why that may be the case here in Georgia?
Well, there are substantial parts of Georgia where the Atlanta media area is not in play. If you live in South Georgia, you're getting Florida news. You're not getting Atlanta news. So Georgia has a different environment. We're a shared border state with Florida, so it's not surprising that he would be doing better here. We have a lot of business interests that go back and forth. A lot of people retire and go back and forth. So there are a lot of connections that Georgians have with Floridians, obviously, for Floridians.
Right. Certainly. Well, we appreciate your time. We appreciate your efforts on this poll, Mark. And we'll have to see how things shake out. But we appreciate you doing this. Mark Roundtree from Landmark Communications running this poll for us. Thank you for your time, Mark.
Thank you, Doug.